My name is Olivia, and at 34 years old, I never imagined standing in my father's mahogany-paneled office, holding my grandmother's will, while he casually announced he was taking my $2 million inheritance and her beach house in exchange for $50,000. "You should be grateful I'm even giving you $50,000, he said, adjusting his gold cufflinks as if destroying my future was just another business transaction. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever faced family betrayal over money, please like and subscribe. This story might change how you see gratitude forever. The foundation of my relationship with my grandmother Eleanor wasn't built on money, but on love that spanned 20 years of weekly tea sessions at her beach house overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Every Saturday morning since I was 14, I'd drive down the coastal highway to spend time with the woman who became my anchor after my mother died when I was 12. Grandmother Eleanor wasn't just wealthy. She was wise, compassionate, and understood me in ways my father Richard never tried to. While he buried himself in his law practice, building his reputation as one of California's most ruthless corporate attorneys, Eleanor taught me about resilience, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what's right. She'd hold my hand across her antique oak table, her sapphire ring catching the morning light, and tell me stories about building her own fortune in real estate when women weren't welcome in boardrooms. My father's jealousy of our bond was something he barely tried to hide. During family dinners, he'd make snide comments about how I spent more time with his mother than with him. The truth was, Eleanor saw through Richard's polished exterior to the cold, calculating man beneath. She watched him marry Stephanie just 18 months after my mother's death, bringing home a woman 20 years younger, who wore designer clothes like armor and smiled with her mouth but never her eyes. When my half-brother Connor was born, I was 16 and already understood my place in this reconstructed family. Stephanie made sure I knew I was a reminder of Richard's past, not part of their future. Connor grew up spoiled given everything he pointed at, while I learned to earn my achievements. Every scholarship, every internship, every promotion I earned at the marketing firm, where I eventually became director, I did without a penny of help from Richard. Yet through it all, Eleanor remained my constant. During her battle with cancer 2 years ago, our tea sessions moved to her bedroom, where she'd grip my hand with surprising strength and make me promise to take care of the beach house. "It's not just property, darling," she'd whisper, her voice still commanding despite the illness. "It's where your mother and I spent summers together when she was pregnant with you. It's where you learned to be strong. That house is your birthright." 2 weeks before she died, Eleanor called me over alone. Richard and Stephanie were conveniently vacationing in Monaco with Connor. She handed me a handwritten letter sealed in her cream-colored stationery. "Keep this safe," she said, her green eyes still sharp despite the morphine. "There's the official will Richard knows about, and then there's my true wishes in this letter. The beach house and half the trust fund are yours, Olivia. The other half goes to Connor for when he turns 25. Richard gets his father's law books in a modest sum, which is more than he deserves." I held that letter like a talisman through her funeral, where Richard played the grieving son perfectly. He stood at the podium in his black Armani suit, talking about family legacy and honoring Eleanor's memory, while his eyes kept finding mine in the crowd, cold and calculating. Stephanie dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief, while Connor texted on his phone hidden behind the funeral program. 3 months passed after we buried Eleanor in the family plot next to my mother. 3 months of Richard handling the estate as executor of Stephanie, dropping hints about renovating the beach house of Connor, bragging to his friends about his inheritance. I waited for the official reading that letter, burning a hole in my safe deposit box. During those months, I threw myself into work landing the Morrison Industries account that put our firm on the map. My success meant nothing to Richard. At family dinners, I felt obligated to attend. He'd still make his favorite comment, the one he'd been using since I was a teenager. "You should be grateful," he'd say, whether I mentioned a promotion or simply asked him to pass the salt. "Not everyone gets the opportunities you've had." The irony wasn't lost on me. Every opportunity I'd had, I'd created myself. while Connor crashed 3 cars before his 18th birthday and got new ones each time I drove the same Honda Civic for 8 years, until I could afford to buy my own car. While Stephanie redecorated their mansion twice a year, I lived in a modest apartment, saving every penny for the future Eleanor promised me. My best friend Angela, who worked as a paralegal downtown, warned me something felt wrong. "Your dad's been meeting with property developers," she told me over coffee one morning. My boss mentioned seeing him at Coastal Development Group multiple times. I brushed off her concerns, trusting that even Richard wouldn't dare go against Eleanor's explicit wishes. I also started noticing changes in Richard's behavior. He'd become almost cheerful around me, asking about my work with genuine seeming interest. Stephanie invited me to spa days, which I politely declined. Connor suddenly wanted to bond, asking if I'd help him with his college applications. The family that had treated me like an outsider for years was suddenly drawing me close, and every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The night before Richard called me to his office, I had a dream about Eleanor. She was sitting in her beach house, younger and healthy, arranging white roses in a vase. "Remember, darling," she said without looking up, "sometimes you must lose to win. The greatest victories come from appearing defeated." I woke with her perfume in my nostrils and a sense of foreboding in my chest. The summons came through Richard's secretary, Janet, on a Thursday morning, her voice apologetic as always. "Your father requests your presence at his office tomorrow at 10 sharp, she said, and I could hear the discomfort in her tone. Janet had worked for Richard for 15 years and had developed a soft spot for me, often slipping me candy when I visited as a child. I arrived at the law firm of Brennan Whitmore and Associates 5 minutes early, wearing my best business suit, the navy one Eleanor had bought me for my birthday. The receptionist, a new girl who didn't know me, made me wait while Richard kept me cooling my heels for 20 minutes of power play as transparent as glass. When I finally entered his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, I found a full audience. Richard sat behind his massive desk like a king on his throne. His business partner Marcus lounged in one of the leather chairs, scrolling through his phone with practiced disinterest. And there, in the corner, perched on the cream-colored settee, like a cat who'd found the cream, sat Stephanie, her new diamond tennis bracelet catching the light every time she moved her wrist. "Olivia," Richard said, not standing, not offering me a seat. "Thank you for coming. We need to discuss Mother's estate." I remained standing, my hand instinctively moving to my purse where I'd placed a copy of Eleanor's letter. "I've been waiting for the official reading." Richard's smile was thin as paper. "Well, that's what we need to discuss. There are some ambiguities in Mother's will that need clarification." Marcus looked up from his phone, his expression lawyerly neutral. "The will as written has some legal complications that could tie up the estate in probate for years." Complications. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was beginning to race. Richard stood then, coming around his desk in that measured way of his, like a predator who knows the prey is cornered. "Mother wasn't in her right mind those last months. The medications, the pain, it affected her judgment. The will she filed makes unrealistic distributions that don't align with family needs." "Connor's college fund needs to be secured," Stephanie added from her corner, examining her manicure. "And there are tax implications you probably don't understand." The condescension in her voice made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What exactly are you saying?" Richard returned to his desk, pulling out a manila folder. "I'm saying that as executor, I have a fiduciary duty to interpret Mother's wishes in a way that best serves the family. The beach house, for instance, is a drain on resources. The maintenance alone is astronomical. And the trust fund, well, it needs to be managed properly for Connor's future." Connor's future. I couldn't help the incredulity in my voice. "Half of that trust is mine, Richard. And the beach house grandmother specifically left that to me." "Did she?" Richard's eyebrow arched. "The will is vague on that point. It mentions family property remaining in the family. As the eldest son, that technically means it comes to me to distribute as I see fit." I reached into my purse, pulling out Eleanor's letter. She was very specific in her actual wishes. Richard barely glanced at the envelope. "A letter written under the influence of heavy medication carries no legal weight. Marcus cleared his throat, shifting into lawyer mode. "Handwritten letters, especially those created without witness verification, are considered unofficial and legally non-binding. Any attempt to use such a document to contest an executor's interpretation would result in lengthy litigation. Litigation that would cost you more than you'd ever hope to recover, Richard added smoothly. Legal fees for estate disputes run into the hundreds of thousands, and that's assuming you could even find a lawyer willing to go against our firm. The threat hung in the air like smog. I looked at each of them, seeing the trap they'd so carefully constructed. So what exactly are you offering? Richard's smile widened, showing too many teeth. I'm offering you $50,000 free and clear. No legal battles, no family drama, no destroying mother's memory with ugly public disputes. You sign over your claims and you walk away with enough for a nice down payment on a condo. 50,000. I repeated the number, tasting its bitterness. For a $2 million inheritance and a beach house worth at least $3 million more. You should be grateful I'm even offering that much, Richard said, his favorite phrase sliding out smooth as silk. Connor is the future of this family. He needs those resources for his education, his future. You're already established in your career. You don't need mother's money. Stephanie stood gliding over to stand beside Richard, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of unity. We're trying to be generous here, Olivia. This offer comes from a place of love. We want to keep the family together, not tear it apart with legal battles. Your grandmother would want the family to stay together. Richard added, the manipulation so bold it took my breath away. She'd be horrified at the thought of her death causing discord. Take the offer, Olivia. It's more than fair. Marcus was already pulling out documents, spreading them across Richard's desk. We've prepared everything for your signature. Clean, simple, straightforward. You sign away any claims to the estate beyond the 50,000, and the transfer happens immediately. I stared at the papers, black ink on white paper that would erase everything Eleanor had wanted for me. I need time to think. Of course, Richard said magnanimously. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer decreases by 10,000 for every day you delay. And if you choose to contest this through legal channels, the offer disappears entirely, and you'll be facing our full legal team. Think about it carefully, Stephanie added, her voice syrup sweet. Family is so much more important than money, don't you think? I left that office on shaking legs, my mind reeling from the calculated cruelty of their ambush. In the elevator, Janet appeared just as the doors were closing, slipping inside with an apologetic expression. I'm so sorry, she whispered, glancing around nervously. I couldn't warn you properly. But, Olivia, you should know your father's been planning this for months, even before your grandmother died. The elevator doors opened before I could respond, and Janet disappeared into the crowd of lawyers and clerks, leaving me with this new piece of the puzzle. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Connor. Mom says we're getting the beach house, can't wait to throw parties there this summer. The casualness of his greed, the assumption that my inheritance was already theirs, ignited something in me. But I remembered Eleanor's words from my dream. Sometimes you must lose to win. That night, I sat in my apartment with Angela, spreading out every document I had, while she reviewed the legal implications with her trained eye. The coffee table was covered with papers, legal precedents she'd printed, and the remains of Chinese takeout we'd barely touched. They're not wrong about the litigation costs, Angela said, her expression grim. Estate disputes are brutal expensive, and Richard knows every judge in the county. But, Olivia, this is criminal what they're doing. Criminal and legal aren't always opposites, I replied, staring at Eleanor's letter. Her handwriting was shaky but clear, every word a testament to her wishes. He's counting on me not having the resources to fight. Angela was running calculations on her laptop, her forehead creased with concentration. Even if you found a lawyer to take this on contingency, which is unlikely against Richard's firm, you're looking at 2 to 3 years minimum in court. The 50,000 wouldn't even cover a year of legal fees. I stood and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Richard and Stephanie were probably celebrating their victory already. The beach house where I'd learned to swim, where Eleanor taught me to be strong, where my mother's laughter still seemed to echo in the walls, would become their weekend party venue. What if I take the deal? I said quietly. Angela's head snapped up. You can't be serious. Eleanor used to tell me something, I continued, still staring at the lights. She said the best revenge against those who wrong you isn't anger or violence, it's success. And sometimes she said you must lose to win. That's very philosophical, but it doesn't get you your inheritance back. I turned to face my friend, and something in my expression must have changed because Angela leaned back, eyes widening. You're planning something. I'm planning to take their offer, I said calmly. And then I'm going to document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every manipulation. Richard thinks he's won, but he's forgetting something crucial. What's that? I'm Eleanor's granddaughter. I learned from the best. The next morning, I returned to Richard's office with my own recorder hidden in my purse, though I made sure to ask if they minded if I reviewed the documents one more time before signing. Richard was magnanimous in victory, even offering me coffee, which Stephanie poured with a smile that never reached her eyes. I want to be clear about what I'm signing, I said, reading through each page methodically. This states that in exchange for $50,000, I relinquish all claims to my grandmother Eleanor's estate, including the beach house at 24 Coastal Drive, the trust fund established in 1998, and all personal effects not already distributed. That's correct. Marcus confirmed, his tone professional but satisfied. And this clause here, I continued, pointing to a section near the bottom. This indemnifies you as executor from any future claims of mismanagement or breach of fiduciary duty. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. Standard language. It protects the estate from frivolous lawsuits. Of course. I set down the papers. And if I sign this, when do I receive the $50,000? Immediately, Stephanie said eagerly. Wire transfer within the hour. I picked up the pen Richard offered, a Mont Blanc that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. For a moment, I held it over the signature line, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Then I thought of Eleanor's strength, her wisdom, her faith in me. I signed my name with a steady hand. Richard's relief was palpable, his shoulders dropping as if a weight had been lifted. You've made the right choice, Olivia. Your grandmother would be proud that you put family first. I'm sure she would. I agreed, my voice neutral. As promised, the money appeared in my account within the hour. $50,000, the price Richard had put on my birthright. I stared at the deposit notification on my phone, then did something that would have puzzled them if they'd known. I smiled. After leaving the office, I didn't go home or to work. Instead, I drove to the beach house using my key one last time. The familiar creak of the door, the smell of salt air mixed with Eleanor's favorite lavender potpourri, the way the light streamed through the windows she'd specially designed to catch the morning sun. It all felt like a goodbye. But in Eleanor's study, I found what I was looking for, her appointment book from the last year filled with notes in her careful handwriting. Doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and most importantly, visits from Richard. The dates were telling. He'd increased his visits dramatically in her final months, always when I was at work, always when the nurses were on break. I photographed every page, then moved to her desk, where she kept her correspondence. In a locked drawer that Richard had apparently missed, I found carbon copies of letters she'd sent to another attorney. Harold Westbrook expressing concerns about Richard's pressure for her to change her will. The dates aligned perfectly with Richard's visits. My phone buzzed with a text from Connor. Dad says you took the deal. Smart move, sis. That beach house needs too much work anyway. We're going to tear it down and build something modern. Tear it down. They were going to destroy Eleanor's legacy and build some glass and chrome monstrosity. The fury that rose in me was white hot, but I channeled it into cold determination. That evening, I made my first call to Harold Westbrook. The elderly attorney remembered Eleanor well, and was disturbed to hear about the circumstances of my disinheritance. Eleanor came to me 6 months before she died. He revealed, his voice heavy with regret. She wanted to change her executor from Richard to me, but Richard found out and convinced her I was too old, that it would be too much stress for me. She was so ill by then, so vulnerable to his manipulation. Do you have any documentation of her wishes? I asked. I have her original will, Harold said quietly. The one she filed with me before Richard convinced her to redo everything with his firm. It's quite different from what I'm sure he's executing now. My heart raced. Can you send me a copy? I'll do better than that. I'll file it with the probate court. It might not override the newer will, but it establishes a pattern of intent that could be very interesting to the right authorities. Authorities! Harold's voice took on an edge I hadn't expected from the genteel old lawyer. What your father has done isn't just unethical, Ms. Olivia. Depending on how he influenced your grandmother in her final months, it could be criminal elder abuse. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult is a felony in California. The word felony hung between us like a promise. What would you need to prove that? I asked. Documentation of his visits during her illness, evidence of mental manipulation, proof that he used his position of trust to enrich himself at her expense. Medical records showing her mental state, witness testimonies from caregivers, any financial irregularities in how he's handling the estate. Give me 30 days, I said. I'll get you everything you need. The investigation I launched over the next month would have made Eleanor proud. I approached it like I would a marketing campaign, identifying targets, gathering intelligence, building alliances. The $50,000 Richard had given me became my war chest, and I invested every penny in uncovering the truth. The first breakthrough came from Janet, Richard's secretary. I met her for coffee on her lunch break, choosing a cafe far from the law firm. She was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder, but her loyalty to Eleanor was stronger than her fear of Richard. Your grandmother called the office multiple times in her last months, Janet revealed, sliding a folder across the table. She wanted to speak to other attorneys, but Mr. Richard always intercepted the calls. I kept copies of the phone logs. The log showed 17 attempts by Eleanor to reach other partners at the firm, all redirected to Richard. Janet had also documented Richard's instructions to her. If my mother calls, I handle it personally, no exceptions. There's more, Janet continued, her voice dropping. The week before your grandmother passed, Mr. Richard had me schedule meetings with Coastal Development Group. He was negotiating the sale of the beach house before your grandmother was even gone. She produced copies of emails carefully printed and dated. The development company was offering $7 million for the property, with plans to demolish Eleanor's house and build luxury condos. Richard's responses showed eager interest, promising quick possession after the estate was settled. Connor surprisingly became my next ally, though he didn't know it. My half-brother, spoiled as he was, had a habit of oversharing on social media. His Instagram stories from the past months painted a damning picture, videos of Richard and Stephanie discussing the estate over dinner, believing Connor's phone was focused on his food. One particularly clear clip caught Stephanie saying, "Once we get the old woman's money, we can finally pay off the Marina Bay investment." I hired a private investigator with part of my war chest, a former FBI agent named Diana who specialized in financial crimes. What she uncovered was staggering. Your father is drowning in debt, Diana reported, spreading financial documents across her desk. Bad investments primarily. He put $3 million into a tech startup that went belly up, another $2 million into a real estate scheme that turned out to be fraudulent. He's been borrowing against his partnership at the firm, and the partners are getting restless. What about Stephanie? Diana smiled grimly. Your stepmother has a gambling problem. High-stakes poker private games in Chinatown. She owes some very dangerous people about $800,000. They've been patient because of your father's reputation, but that patience is wearing thin. The picture was becoming clear. Richard hadn't stolen my inheritance out of greed alone, but out of desperation. The beach house sale would clear their debts and leave enough for them to maintain their facade of wealth. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source, the night nurse who'd cared for Eleanor in her final weeks. Maria had been fired by Richard 2 days after Eleanor's death, ostensibly for budget reasons. I tracked her down to a hospice facility in San Diego, where she'd taken a new position. Mrs. Eleanor was clear-minded most days, Maria told me, tears in her eyes. But your father, he would visit when her medication was at its peak, when she was most confused. He would bring papers, tell her they were for her medical care, for her comfort. She would sign anything in those moments. Did you ever see what she was signing? Maria nodded, pulling out a small notebook. I documented everything. Times, dates, what medication she was on, what Mr. Richard asked her to sign. I knew something was wrong, but I needed my job. The notebook was a goldmine. Richard had systematically visited Eleanor during her most vulnerable moments, obtaining signatures on document after document. One entry particularly stood out: 3 days before her death. When Eleanor was barely conscious, Richard had her sign a codicil to her will that dramatically altered the distributions. The final piece of the puzzle came from Marcus himself, though he never knew it. Richard's partner had been having an affair with Stephanie for months, something Diana's surveillance quickly confirmed. Their pillow talk recorded during a weekend when Richard was supposedly at a legal conference revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. "Richard's an idiot," Marcus could be heard saying on the recording. "We could have gotten $12 million for that beach property if he'd waited. But he's so desperate to cover his debts he's taking the first offer." Stephanie's response was equally damning. "Once the old woman's estate is liquid, I'm divorcing him anyway. You and I can start fresh with my half." They went on to discuss how they'd hidden assets, created shell companies to funnel money, and even considered what would happen if I contested the will. "Richard says Olivia's too weak to fight," Stephanie said. "She'll take the 50,000 and slink away like always." Armed with this evidence, I met with Harold again this time, accompanied by a representative from the State Attorney General's office, a sharp young prosecutor named James Chen, who specialized in elder abuse cases. "This is one of the clearest cases of financial elder abuse I've seen," James said after reviewing everything. "The systematic manipulation, the exploitation of her medicated state, the conspiracy to defraud rightful heirs. We're looking at multiple felonies here." "What's the next step?" I asked. "We need one more thing," James replied. "We need to catch them in the act of disposing of the stolen assets. If they're moving money through shell companies, if they're actively selling the beach house under fraudulent pretenses, that's what we call enterprise corruption. It triples the penalties." Harold leaned forward. "Richard's 65th birthday party is in 2 weeks. The entire legal community will be there. Judges, partners from every major firm, media connections. If you wanted to make a statement," James and I exchanged glances, "a public revelation would destroy Richard more thoroughly than any private legal action. His reputation, the thing he valued above all else, would be annihilated in front of everyone who mattered to him." "I'll need access to the party," I said. Harold smiled. "I'm invited, of course. You'll be my +1. And James, I believe the Attorney General's office received an invitation as well." James nodded. "We did. Several of us will be attending in an unofficial capacity." We spent the next 2 weeks preparing meticulously. Diana continued her surveillance documenting Richard and Marcus moving money through a complex web of offshore accounts. The beach house sale was scheduled for the Monday after the party papers already drawn up Eleanor's legacy, about to be reduced to a real estate transaction. I also discovered something that broke my heart and strengthened my resolve simultaneously. In Eleanor's safe deposit box at a bank Richard didn't know about, I found letters she'd written to me over the years, but never sent, documenting Richard's emotional abuse of her, his constant demands for money, his threats to keep me away from her if she didn't comply with his wishes. One letter dated just a month before her death read, "My darling Olivia, if you're reading this, then Richard has done what I fear he will. Know that everything I have should be yours, not because of blood or obligation, but because you're the only one who loved me for myself, not my money. The beach house is yours by right and by love. Don't let them take it from you. Fight with the wisdom I've tried to teach you. Sometimes the longest path to justice is the surest one. All my love, grandmother." The night of Richard's 65th birthday party arrived with all the pomp he'd dreamed of. The country club was decorated in black and gold champagne, flowed like water, and the guest list read like a who's who of California's legal elite. Richard stood at the entrance in a custom tuxedo, Stephanie glittering beside him in a gown that cost more than most people's annual salary, greeting guests like royalty receiving subjects. When Harold and I arrived, Richard's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, anger, and finally a forced smile as other guests watched our interaction with interest. "Olivia," he said stiffly. "I wasn't expecting you." "Harold invited me," I replied smoothly, wearing Eleanor's emerald necklace, the one piece of jewelry I'd managed to claim before the estate was locked down. "I wouldn't miss your birthday, Richard." Stephanie's eyes locked onto the necklace, her jaw tightening. "That's Eleanor's," she said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "She gave it to me before she died. Personally. Unless you'd like to claim that was due to undue influence too. Harold steered me away before the conversation could escalate, but I could feel Richard's eyes following us through the room. The party proceeded with speeches from partners praising Richard's legal acumen, his dedication to justice, his integrity. I stood in the back waiting. Connor found me during the cocktail hour, slightly drunk already at 19. "Hey, sis," he slurred. "No hard feelings about the house, right? Dad says you understand it's for the best." "I understand perfectly," I assured him, and I meant it. The moment came after dinner during the traditional toast portion of the evening. Richard had just finished a self-aggrandizing speech about family values and the importance of legacy when Harold stood tapping his glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast as well," Harold said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "But first, Richard's daughter Olivia has prepared something special for this occasion." I walked to the front of the room, my phone connected to the venue's presentation system. Richard's face had gone pale, his hand reaching for his phone, but it was too late. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I wanted to share some memories of my father's recent handling of my grandmother Eleanor's estate. The first slide appeared on the screens around the room, security footage from Eleanor's house date, stamped showing Richard removing boxes of documents in the middle of the night, 2 days after her death. This is my father removing papers from my grandmother's home before the will was officially read. I narrated calmly. The room stirred, whispers beginning. Richard stood, but Harold's hand on his shoulder, and the presence of several state investigators near the exits kept him in place. The next slide showed the email exchanges with Coastal Development dated before Eleanor's death. Here we see my father negotiating the sale of my grandmother's beach house, while she was still alive, promising possession he had no legal right to guarantee. Stephanie tried to leave, but found her path blocked by James Chen, who showed his badge discreetly. The presentation continued Maria's testimony about the medicated signatures, the financial documents showing Richard's desperate debts, the shell companies prepared to hide the estate's assets. Each revelation drew gasps from the assembled legal community, many of whom were recording on their phones despite the supposedly private event. The coup de grace was the audio of Marcus and Stephanie discussing their affair and their plans to steal the estate money. Marcus's wife, seated at the head table, stood and threw her champagne in his face before storming out, followed by several cameras. "The $50,000 my father so generously gave me in exchange for my entire inheritance," I continued as the room sat in stunned silence, "was used to uncover this evidence of systematic elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Every document has been provided to the Attorney General's office and the State Bar Association." James Chen stepped forward, then his badge visible. "Richard Brennan, Stephanie Brennan, Marcus Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy, elder abuse, fraud, and violation of fiduciary duty." The arrests happened in full view of everyone. Richard, for once in his life, was speechless as they read him his rights. Stephanie sobbed dramatically, her mascara running in black streams. Marcus tried to bargain immediately, offering to testify against Richard in exchange for leniency. Connor stood frozen, his phone hanging limply in his hand, the realization of what his parents had done finally sinking in. As they were let out, Richard finally found his voice. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed at me. "The family, the firm, everything your grandmother built." "No, Richard," I replied calmly. "I saved everything grandmother built. You're the one who tried to destroy it with your greed." The party dispersed quickly after that, guests fleeing the scandal like it was contagious. But Harold and several other senior attorneys remained approaching me with mixtures of admiration and respect. "Eleanor would be so proud," Harold said, tears in his eyes. "You fought with wisdom, not anger. You let them hang themselves with their own rope." The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive, with the evidence I'd compiled and Marcus's eager testimony to save himself. The case against Richard was ironclad. The criminal trial resulted in a 5-year sentence for Richard, 3 years for Stephanie, and 2 years suspended for Marcus in exchange for his cooperation. But it was the civil proceedings that truly restored justice. The probate court ruled that all documents signed by Eleanor during her medicated periods were invalid. The original will that Harold had filed was recognized as her true last testament. The beach house, the trust fund, and 90% of the estate came to me with a small portion set aside for Connor's education, managed by a court-appointed trustee until he turned 25. Richard's law license was permanently revoked. The firm dissolved, unable to survive the scandal. He lost everything: his reputation, his fortune, his freedom, and ultimately his family. Stephanie filed for divorce while he was in prison, though she got nothing in the settlement since all their assets were seized for restitution. The most unexpected development was Connor. The spoiled boy who'd taken everything for granted was forced to face reality. With his parents in prison and their assets frozen, he had nowhere to turn except to me. I'll never forget the day he showed up at my apartment, no longer the cocky teenager, but a scared young man. "I didn't know," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I swear, Olivia, I didn't know what they were doing to grandmother." "I know," I said, and I meant it. Connor had been a tool in their scheme, not a participant. "I have nowhere to go," he admitted. "The house is being seized. My college fund was apparently stolen money. I don't even have money for food." I could have turned him away. Some might say I should have, but Eleanor had taught me that wisdom includes mercy. "The beach house has a pool house," I said. "You can stay there while you figure things out." Connor's rehabilitation was gradual but genuine. Away from his parents' toxic influence, he revealed himself to be intelligent and capable, just terribly misguided. I helped him apply for student loans, get a part-time job, and learn what it meant to earn rather than expect. He started visiting Richard in prison not for money or favors, but to understand how his father had become so corrupt. Those visits changed him, watching Richard's bitterness eat away at him, even behind bars. "I don't want to become that," Connor told me after one particularly difficult visit. "Promise me you'll stop me if I ever start down that path." The beach house was restored to its original glory, every detail carefully preserved as Eleanor would have wanted. I continued the tradition of Saturday morning tea, though now I invited women from the local shelter, young girls who needed what Eleanor had given me: wisdom, support, and proof that they could overcome anything. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Richard in prison. His handwriting was shaky, the confident swagger gone. "Olivia, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. I let greed and pride destroy everything that mattered. Your grandmother tried to tell me for years that you were the best of our family, but I was too jealous to listen. Jealous of your relationship with her, jealous of your integrity. Jealous that you succeeded without my help. I see now that the inheritance was never about money. It was about trust, and I betrayed that trust. I'm sorry, not for getting caught, but for becoming someone who needed to be caught. Richard." I read the letter 3 times before responding. My reply was brief. "Richard, forgiveness isn't mine to give. It was grandmother's, and you lost that chance. But I can tell you this: the beach house still stands. Her legacy continues, and Connor is becoming the man you never were. That's the best ending we could hope for. Live with your choices. I'm living with mine. Olivia." The greatest irony came a year later when a second will was discovered in Eleanor's papers, one she'd written years before any of the drama. In it, she'd left a message for Richard. "My son, I leave you the one thing money can't buy, and you never learned to value the opportunity to earn genuine love and respect. If you're reading this, it means you've tried to take what wasn't yours. I knew you would. I raised you with every advantage, and somehow failed to teach you the only lesson that mattered: wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. Olivia understands this. She always has. That's why she inherits not just my money, but my trust." Harold had the letter framed and hung in his office, a reminder to all who entered about the true nature of inheritance. During this time, I also grew close to Harold's son Daniel, who'd returned from serving overseas as a military lawyer. He'd been following the case from abroad and came back specifically to support his father through the stress of the trial. Daniel was everything Richard wasn't: honorable, humble, and genuinely kind. Our relationship developed slowly, built on long walks along the beach where Eleanor's house stood, conversations about justice and integrity, and shared values that money couldn't buy. When he proposed a year later, he did it during Saturday tea with the shelter women cheering us on. "Your grandmother would have loved this," Harold said at our wedding, held at the beach house with the ocean as our witness. "She always said the best revenge against those who wrong you is to live well." Connor served as one of Daniel's groomsmen, having earned his place through genuine change. He was studying law not to follow in Richard's footsteps, but to become a public defender, helping those who couldn't afford justice. 5 years have passed since that birthday party that changed everything. The beach house still stands, though now it hosts more than just Saturday teas. It's become a center for women's financial literacy, teaching others how to protect their inheritances and understand their rights. Eleanor's portrait hangs in the main room watching over the classes with that knowing smile. Connor graduated law school last month, third in his class. He's joined the public defender's office taking on cases for elderly victims of financial abuse. "It's my penance," he says, though I tell him it's his purpose. Richard attended the graduation in shackles, a special dispensation from the court. The pride in his eyes was mixed with profound regret, finally understanding what he'd missed by valuing money over meaning. Stephanie disappeared after her release, moving to Florida under an assumed name. Marcus tried to rebuild his practice in another state, but the scandal followed him. Last I heard, he was working as a paralegal for a personal injury firm, a cosmic justice that Eleanor would have appreciated. The $7 million development deal for the beach house fell through after the scandal, but it didn't matter. The house is worth more as a monument to Eleanor's wisdom than any amount of money could represent. Every room holds memories, lessons, and the laughter of women learning they're stronger than they knew. Daniel and I discovered we're expecting our first child next spring. We've already decided if it's a girl, her middle name will be Eleanor. If it's a boy, Harold, after the man who stood by justice when it would have been easier to stay silent. Richard continues to write from prison, each letter showing more genuine reflection. He started teaching literacy to other inmates, finding purpose in service for the first time in his life. "I finally understand what Mother meant," he wrote recently. "Wealth isn't what you have, it's what you give. I had everything and gave nothing. Now I have nothing and finally have something to give." I visited him last week, the first time since his sentencing. He's aged decades in 5 years, his hair completely gray, his arrogance replaced with something approaching wisdom. "Do you hate me?" he asked, his hand shaking on the metal table between us. "No," I said truthfully. "Hate would mean you still have power over me. You don't." "What then?" "I nothing you, Richard. You're a cautionary tale I tell at the Women's Center. You're a reminder of what happens when greed becomes greater than grace. You're the reason Connor became a good man, because he saw what happened when someone chooses to be a bad one." Richard nodded, tears falling freely. "The 50,000, he said suddenly. "You used it to destroy me." "No," I corrected. "I used it to save grandmother's legacy. You destroyed yourself." "You should be grateful," he said, then caught himself, a bitter laugh escaping. "God, how many times did I say that to you?" "Every time you wanted me to accept less than I deserved," I replied. "But here's what you never understood, Richard. I am grateful. Grateful for grandmother's wisdom, grateful for the strength to fight back, grateful for the friends who stood by me, grateful even for this experience, because it taught me my own power." "And me?" he asked. "Can you be grateful for me?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Yes," I finally said. "Finally. I'm grateful you showed me exactly who I never want to become." The 30-minute visit ended with Richard asking one final question. "Will you take care of Connor?" "I already am," I assured him. "He's becoming the son you should have been proud of all along." Walking out of that prison, I felt the last chains of the past fall away. The beach house was waiting. Daniel was waiting. Our future child was waiting. And Saturday was coming with another group of women ready to learn that their worth isn't measured in what others think they deserve, but in what they're willing to fight for. As I drove along the coastal highway, the ocean sparkling in the afternoon sun, I could almost hear Eleanor's voice on the wind. "Sometimes you must lose to win, darling. The greatest victories come from appearing defeated." She was right as always. I'd signed away my inheritance for $50,000, looking like a fool accepting defeat. But that apparent loss became the key to total victory. Richard had demanded gratitude for crumbs while planning to steal the feast. Instead, he got a feast of consequences that will last the rest of his life. Standing in the beach house that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I raised a cup of Eleanor's favorite tea in a toast to the woman who'd seen all of this coming. "You knew, didn't you?" I said to her portrait. "You knew Richard would do this, knew I'd fight back, knew how it would end. That's why you told me sometimes you must lose to win." The house creaked gently. The sound Eleanor always said was the house agreeing with you. In that moment, I understood the greatest inheritance she'd left me wasn't money or property, but the wisdom to know when to bend, so you don't break, when to appear weak, so your enemies reveal their strengths, and when to strike with the accumulated power of patient justice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students at the center, new fights for justice. But tonight in Eleanor's house by the sea, surrounded by the legacy of a woman who turned her grandson's greed into her granddaughter's triumph, I was exactly where I belonged. The greatest inheritance I've learned isn't what we receive, but what we choose to do when someone tries to take it away. And sometimes, just sometimes, when someone demands we be grateful for their cruelty, the best response is to show them what real gratitude looks like, the grace to fight with wisdom, the strength to win with dignity, and the mercy to find meaning even in our enemy's defeat. The $50,000 Richard gave me to steal my birthright became the seed money for his destruction. But more than that, it became the foundation for Connor's redemption, for Daniel's love for the Women's Center that carries on Eleanor's legacy. Every dollar was transformed from shame to power, from loss to victory. As I close this story preparing for the next chapter of life growing within me, I leave you with Eleanor's final lesson, the one she wrote in a letter I found hidden in the beach house's attic just last month. "Darling Olivia, if you're reading this, you've won. Not because you got the money or kept the house, but because you learned that true wealth is the courage to stand against injustice, the wisdom to choose your battles, and the grace to transform even betrayal into blessing. Your father thought he was teaching you to be grateful for scraps. Instead, you learned to turn scraps into a feast. That's the real inheritance. I leave you not what's in my will, but what's in your will. The will to fight, the will to forgive, but not forget, and the will to build something beautiful from the ashes of what others tried to burn. With all my love forever and always, Grandmother Eleanor." Have you ever faced a situation where someone in power tried to make you grateful for less than you deserved? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice. And if you know someone struggling with inheritance disputes or family financial abuse, please share this video with them. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward fighting back. Thank you for watching. And remember, your worth isn't determined by what others think you deserve, but by what you're willing to stand up and claim for yourself. Stay strong, stay wise, and never let anyone make you grateful for less than your worth.